Nicholas Lacassi, digital tutorial. He'll show you how to do it, so just watch the tutorial.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. Today I was going to show you guys how to make exploded axons like this. I thought I would start off by kind of showing some inspiration of some stuff that I've done and these my friends have done. But like we always are asked to make isometrics like this. But with a little bit of extra flair, you could take those objects and animate them and add a layer of complexity for your digital presentations and to have them on your website. Um, and so they don't all have to be animating and moving. You could very easily do screenshots of your Rhino model and do stop motion videos to kind of explain your ideas. Here's another one. I'm just going to skip through some of these really quickly, and the links to all of these will be on attached to this video or in the description. So each one of these is a frame that we use to produce animations to explain a construction process. Like that combined with some layers of animation and elevating creates a pretty clear process. But you can also use this for a variety of things, from your creating your process of form work, creating your design, to kind of show a bit of your process. So it's not just showing off of your final work, but a means to get to an end. So these were a bunch of different house profiles that related to the project that we're going to be animating today, which is a Florida Kaplan house that I worked on with Adam Modisett at NJIT. So yeah, so kind of like stuff like this where you can like do a cutaway and showing a section, or having a process where you're showing a construction process could all be like potential use cases for this software. So we're going to walk through a process today of taking line work that was done in Rhino and then bringing it into Illustrator and animating and separating each component into different layers, and then bringing those components into After Effects to produce an animation like this. All right, so we're going to be starting off in Rhino. And I think it's extremely important to have really clean file management when you're doing your make 2Ds of your different components and layers. So here you can see the completed Rhino file, and I've tried to stay extremely organized. If you look at the layers on the side, everything is separated into their different objects. So I can go in and turn things off, like just the exterior geometry, just the second floor and the first floor, so that I can clearly like go in and edit and make some changes. And and this and this model isn't completely perfect. You can kind of see that some things are intersecting with each other. But if you have a really clean model, it will make it much easier going forward. So if I zoom out here, you kind of get to see a bit of the pieces. So what I've done is I've cut this model into a couple different sections, so that we can first start off with an isometric view of the first floor plan. And then we have this piece up here, which is showing the second floor plan, but it's removed. And then you have the roof up here. So we could just have those three pieces, but to add another layer of realism, we've included a second base that we can work off of, so that when we lift up the roof, it can change to that second base. So if I switch over to top view here, you can kind of see these layers already set up. So like the organization of that is also extremely important. So if you look on the right here, I have layers for each one of them. So for example, 04 first floor is going to be this one right here. And layer management is extremely important because we have to bring these layers into Illustrator to adjust line weights and things, and those layers trying to translate over to After Effects. And so I know a lot of you have like use Rhino only in your workflow, but Illustrator is a crucial like mid step, because you would have to you have to bring these things to Photoshop and edit them if you wanted to bring them into After Effects, but if you do it in Illustrator, things remain vectorized, so you can scale up or scale down, and they would still keep their image quality. So I'm just going to select these objects and move them over here, so we can kind of go through the process of setting this up. So this is what you usually get when you make 2D. As you can see, there's a lot of like overlapping lines, and this would be a mess to go in and trim everything up. But you can use the command curve boolean, which I don't know if all of you know, but it's my favorite Rhino command, to create outlines and create poche. So as you can see, for each one of these layers, I have sublayers inside of it. So I'm putting everything on this O2 layer, which is kind of like the baseline. Like this is going to be the lightest line weight, but we're going to have like cut layers over it and outlines below it. So if I select this geometry and I have my O3 outline selected, I can use the command curve boolean, which is right here. And then it's asking to click inside regions to keep. So I'm going to click the outside and then this center piece here, because you can also see through that. And then I press enter, and then it produces this. So this is really extremely helpful because you have to place a background behind it. It's like the whole idea behind these animations is that you have layers that are sitting on top of each other that cover each other. So as you can see here, as this lifts up, it creates like a kind of a gap, and you can see beyond it. But you wouldn't be able to do that unless you have like a white background behind it. So then this layer would get a white background in Illustrator, and then this is our light line weight, and then we can do a curve boolean for the poche as well. So if I hide this and I do a curve boolean here, I can go in and like click these pieces, and this will generate closed poly surfaces that we can very easily make into a cut line. So I'm not going to go through and I'll do all these right now because it's a little bit tedious, but it's much easier than going in and trimming each of these lines and editing them to make it look really clean here. So this is kind of a bit of a start. I'm just going to go and add this one too. And so then if I lock this layer, you'll see that, and we'll select this. You can see that this is the pieces that are already joined to be closed poly surfaces. So it's really important that you have your geometry that's one on separate layers, but then also separate sublayers. So if we kind of come over to here, where I have this amalgamation of all of them put together, and I have these down here where they're separated. So you can work separately when you're creating your individual components, but when you're getting ready to export, it's best to group them together and combine them into one piece. So if I turn these off one by one, you can start to see that first we have our original component, which is our baseline, and that's what everything's going to be coming off of. And then we have our first base here, and then our second base, and our first floor, second floor chunk, and then our roof. So you can kind of see those pieces combined together to sort of create the different pieces that you would need to create your animation. Another thing that I'm doing with these 3D models is I'm using the clipping plane to slice them and kind of figure out where I want to put them. So that's the clipping plane command. And then you can drag and select on your base. And then you can use this and you can lift this up and you can create a section cut or plan cut of your model. So that's what I did initially to create these rough ideas. And then I used the Boolean split command to kind of split these geometries. So once you have your geometry set up and in the right place, you want to make sure that everything is turned on and ready to go before you export it out, and nothing is locked because it won't select. So I'm going to just do a quick show command to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Then I'm going to drag select all of the geometry, and I'm going to go to File, Export Selected, and I'm going to put this into here, and I'm going to just save this as an Illustrator file. I'm going to make sure to put the date on it. It is April 2nd. And for these export options, since this is an axonometric view that's not to scale, doesn't matter, but you could set your scale here. So I'm not going to change any of these settings. Press OK. So now we're going to be getting into Illustrator. So this is the completed file in Illustrator. So I'm going to go to File, Open. And I'm going to open up that Illustrator file, which is here. And so I'm going to grab it from over here.
Quick note about this, you want to make sure when you're exporting geometry out of Rhino into Illustrator that you put it close to the origin. The reason why that it's not on the artboard right now is because it wasn't directly in the origin. But if you're working on a really big scale and you're working all over the place in your Rhino file, it might not appear in Illustrator when you import it. So just make sure when you're making 2D, you just kind of work relatively close to the origin.
So I'm just going to move things over to this artboard here and scale it to place. I'm going to reduce it slightly. I'm holding Alt and Shift to scale from the center. And I'm just going to try to like align it to the middle. Another really important thing about this is like this artboard is going to define your overall composition size when you're in Illustrator. So what you can do is you can click this button right here, which opens up your artboard tool. And if you do Control R, it'll open up the ruler, or you can go over to the view and you can go to show rulers, which would say hide rulers, but if you didn't have the ruler showing, it would say hide rulers. And then you can right click on these and change this to pixels, because that's going to be really important because you want it to be an aspect ratio that's relating to a digital presentation. So the aspect ratio that I like to do is 1920 by 1080 because that's the aspect ratio of a HD TV. So that gets a little bit wider than what we had it currently, but that's okay. And so then we're going to get into these individual layers. So as you can see on the right, since we use good layer management and organization, each of these things is labeled independently. So see how it says 05 roof, these two. So if I turn off everything by dragging and swiping, only the 05 roof layer will remain. And the same thing for the other ones. So I can go to 04, 03, 02, and 01. So I think a good one to start with would be 02 because it has all three layers that we're working with. It has the poche, the interior, and the outline, while some of the other ones don't have a poche. So really quickly, these individual layers, they kind of come in upside down. So I'm just going to quickly reorganize them so that the poche is on top and the outline is below for all of them. And the actual like orientation, like 05 be above 04, doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to kind of like put these on top. Starting with this one, we can change the line weights and the colors of the lines pretty easily. You start to have a lot of layers. You can stretch these and to create a little bit more space for yourself. So you can change the line weight on these layers in a couple different ways. You could turn them all off. You can drag select them all and then change this. So I think a good line weight for this might be 0.25 to keep it extra light, or maybe 0.5. But you kind of have to do it by eye. Kind of like whatever works best for your project. So that looks pretty good. We can go into 02 base, and we can make this maybe 1.5. And then maybe we're making this one 0.75. So when you have all three, they're different line weights, but they're also different colors. So we can go in and we can add a swatch. So we can go over to swatches and click this swatch libraries menu. And we can go to default swatches, art illustration. And if you click this button right here, it'll add like a grayscale swatch with a true black for RGB to it. So we can actually go in and see it. So this is now changed to question marks because it's different stroke colors. And we can click this button, set them all to be black. But it's pretty nice because when you click on this, it'll still show red from the layer manager, but it'll be a little bit different. So now we want to add color to this so that it's distinguished from the different layers. So what I like to do, I like to add a color background. So I'm going to call this layer background. And just to explain really quickly, because I think I might go a little fast sometimes, I click this hamburger icon and I click new layer, and then I change the layer here to background. So you can drag layers up and down like this. I'm going to put this at the end. And then I'm going to use the rectangle tool to make a box on that layer. And then I'm going to set, so the stroke is set here, but you can set the fill to here. And I'm going to make this maybe like a dark purple. I think that could be nice. And this is just really helpful so that you know what you're putting backgrounds on, what's still exposed. Because if everything's white and you're putting a white background on it, it's not going to be very clear. But we don't want to affect this layer. So if we click this button next to the visibility toggle, it'll lock it. So you can't click it now. So if we turn off these two, so just showing the outline, we can click this one and then actually just select white in here to give it a white background. So that's a pretty clear and easy way to make backgrounds, and then you can kind of see how it's popping off of the purple. Also, we need to clean up the poche because the model wasn't completely clean, so there's like lines that are over this, but that's pretty easy to do as well, where we can go and select these pieces. We can select all of them and then do the same thing. But we do run into a slight problem with this one here because as you can see, there's a hole in it. So it's not going to read this as an open geometry. So you can go in and you can make all of these have white backgrounds with this one. But this one you need to do it a little bit differently since there's a hole inside. And so you do that, you can select the geometry with holes inside, and then you want to look for the live paint tool. So a lot of these tools and menus, you can expand them out by holding them down. So I'm going to hold down this shape builder tool to go over to the live paint bucket, or you can use the command K. And then it's going to say that you can like click inside to make it a live paint group. And then now you can like click white and then click inside, and then it'll make it white. So now if we turn that back on, all of those lines that were messed up and off are now hidden behind this hatch, so it looks really clean really easily. So that same thing can be applied to, say, this one, in that we have, I can show the full, where we have a background, and then there's a hole in the center. So we could select this one and then do the live paint bucket tool and then set this to be white. And so you can also copy layer types and line weights pretty easily because all of these green layers that are outlines are going to be the same line weight as this original one that we did here. So what you can do is you can have it be selected, and then you could use the eyedropper tool to then click this one. And so then it'll kind of see it here where it's green with no fill. And then once I use the eyedropper tool and I click on the original one, it will like change the fill and the stroke while keeping it on the same distinct layer. So what I would recommend is that you kind of get your line weights right for one set of your frames, and then copy that over to each of the other ones. Once you have all of your line weights and layers in order, so one final step to make it a little bit easier to export. You can select everything that's in each of your components, like these two original layers, and you can click this hamburger icon up here, and you can click collect a new layer. So that'll make it really easy. And if you expand this down, they're still both editable independently. And if you click on one, it'll still register that. But that'll make it a lot easier for you to kind of go in and make these changes. So I'm going to really quickly just change the names of these and collect them in new layers. We have each of our layers that they seem all to look pretty good. But before we get into the export, I'm showing you a very specific workflow that's using these really particular graphics. But there's a lot of room for like kind of play with this. If you didn't want a colored background, you can get rid of that, and you could go in and really easily you could select this and make this like a yellow background. And then, I mean, I don't know what looks good and what looks bad, but you could also make this have some sort of like gray undertone to it. And then, I don't know, maybe that looks nice. So I would definitely just kind of play around with your graphic style and how this relates to your other drawings. So if you do have this like theme of blues or something, maybe you can color just the floors blue, and then the floors would be this consistent thing. Or if it relates to one of your diagrams, you can kind of create some sort of effects in this. But let me undo that because I don't want to do that. And so then we're going to turn everything on, and we're going to unlock this background. And then, well, we should have saved much sooner than this, but we're saving now. So we're going to click save, and it's automatically going to have it say converted down here. But we're just going to just click this one to override the original. We're going to click save on there. Another thing that's really important right now as we're talking about saving, since you all are on your home computers and your internet might not be as good, I think it's really important to make sure that you have autosave selected. So if you go over to Edit, Preferences, and then File Handling and Clipboard, you can go over and just make sure that this is checked and it's automatically saving recovery data. I have it set to 2 minutes because it doesn't really slow things down when it's auto-saving, unlike like Rhino when it auto-saves. But this is really helpful so that if your files do crash, they save. So now that this is saved, we can come over to Illustrator, where we're going to be animating the movement of these objects. So this is what you're going to see when you open up After Effects for the first time. A brief overview of the interface before we upload anything. Here we have our project timeline where you would upload any of your files that you want to work with. We have effects and presets where you can kind of make any adjustments. It's really similar to Photoshop where you can make any changes, but there's a layer of time. So down here is your timeline where you would add clips, and then here's your composition where you make any edits and changes, and here are some other effects. So everyone has their compositions set up differently. I usually have it set to just the default, but then you can go and adjust these. There's like a small screen version if you're on a laptop. That's a bit small, but it's pretty good. So we can go over to here and we can right click and we can do import file, or we can drag the file in from your file explorer, but this is pretty easy. So that'll open up this dialog, and then we can just select the Illustrator file and import it in. Okay, so there's a couple different kinds of import. We're going to import as a composition, so it maintains the layer sizes. and we're going to have the footage dimension be layer size. So I'm going to press OK, and then it'll create this. So this icon next to here designates that it's a composition. And if we click this drop-down arrow, this will be all those original Illustrator layers already set up. So if I double-click this, it automatically creates a timeline for us where all of our layers are individual here. So this is creating like a 2-second timeline. So each of these is 5 frames, and then there's 30 frames in a second. So we can zoom out. But I think it's really helpful to make this composition size a bit longer, at least when you're starting out, so you have more room to work with. So we can click composition, and then composition settings. And so then that's also telling us the width and height that we set in Illustrator that I carried over to here. But we can change this duration to, say, 6 seconds. Frames, seconds, minutes, hours. So if we set this to 6, 0, that means it's 6 seconds and 0 frames. So press OK. And then we can use the Alt key and then use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out to see more of the frame. Or you can use this slider to drag and slide. So there's a couple different options. So in terms of working with these clips and moving them around, you can select on them or do a shift select all of them. And then when you go over to the edge, this will pop up and you can make these longer and shorter. So this would pretty much be how you would make a stop motion animation, kind of things that we talked about before, where you can just take these pieces and move them over for have them appear at different times. So in the same way as Illustrator, there's these eyeballs to toggle visibility. So we could make a really quick stop motion animation just by dragging these over to each second and just have it play out. So if I'm moving these over to the 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, which I missed a little bit, and then the 4 second. So if you press play on this and you turn these on, this will kind of select them over each other. But you see how it's showing the backgrounds behind them, like when this one changes. So what you would have to do is you would have this one end where that one begins so that it goes away and reveals the next one. So for this first one, I was able to go and drag the edge because it's on the edge there. But sometimes you might not be able to do that because I moved it over and I dragged it. So you can also use the shortcut Control, Shift, and D to create a slice and a duplicate. So that's kind of like your cutting tool. It's Control, Shift, D. And you can delete that. Same thing for this one. I'm doing Control, Shift, D. Deleting that. And then this one. I'm deleting that one. And so you see here, the background disappears after this one because that one, it's not extended to be long enough. So we can drag it out to here. And then we can press play on that. And this will create a stop motion animation of our process. So this is like a really simple way to kind of, if you had multiple axonometrics, which were showing different things like structure, circulation, massing, you could make a really quick a GIF or video showing those pieces instead of having them be on separate slides in your digital presentations. So we're getting into now animating their movement. So I think starting with things in 1 second increments is a good way to kind of just get the movement initially. But before we get into that, let's make sure we save here because I always forget and we have to make sure that everything's not gonna crash. So you can click File, Save. We're gonna put this in here and we're gonna call it today's date again. And so this is gonna save an AEP file. But really the best thing about this is if you don't edit these layers and make any changes, you can go back to Illustrator and you can add like people and objects and then it'll update live. So if I go in and say, I want to put a box on this layer for, I don't know, for some reason, and then I click save. And so if I don't mess with the artboard size or add any new layers, the After Effects file will update and that box will be there. So I'm going to get rid of that because we do not need a box there. Save that. And that box goes away. So I think my layers are a little bit different in that 05 is the last one, but in actuality, this should be the one that appears first with this second floor base. So I'm going to just move these over for now, and I'm going to bring this one down to here. I'm going to move both of these down, actually, so they're on top. And then actually, I'm going to put this roof on top. So if I can just explain that again, at this point, it's just the original for this first second, and at this second, this changes, and now it splits into two pieces. And then we can animate that piece coming off. So it looks pretty seamless. So in the same way that you can adjust like hue, saturation, opacity, all those things in Photoshop, in After Effects, you can do all those things, but then there's a layer of time. So if we have this file selected, which is the one that we're going to be animating, you can click this down arrow and then click this down arrow for transform. And then we can animate this position. So you can do that by clicking this stopwatch. And then that would say that at this time point, it's going to be in this position. And so when you do click that, it creates a keyframe there. And we could move it by clicking and dragging. And then it will, it'll move over there. It's just pretty jarring. But we want it to move forward. So we want to move it upward, sorry. And so I think we'll start by just bringing this over to the 2-second time and have this roof move straight up off the screen. So I'm just holding the shift button to make it sure that it's going straight. And so then if we play that back, I'm going to extend this out a little bit. It'll lift up and off the screen. So you can set keyframes to all of these, but just for this tutorial, we're just doing position. Just kind of keep things straightforward. So once that piece comes off, then we want the next base to appear, which would be this one, which kind of just shows the second floor below it. So if we bring this one back, so after this one appears, there's this one here. Then we also want this first floor piece to appear. So as soon as this comes off the screen, we want this to change to be that. So you can kind of see that change where that line forms along that cut. And the same way that we created a position here, we can bring this line down and this for transform, and then we can create a position marker. Another alternate way to do this would be you can use the P on your keyboard shortcut, and then it'll pop up that position marker. I'm just clicking P. And then so we can set that position. And then also after 2 seconds, we can have it, well, a little bit less than 2 seconds. We can have that piece shift up and out. So now if we play that back, we have animated 2 movements. So that one goes, and then that one goes. So right now it's like a little bit fast, and then it kind of just fades away to nothing. So we want to extend this bottom piece, base 2, over to the 4-second marker. And then we have this sort of animation of these pieces lifting up. So I think a good step at this point would be to pre-compose things. So pre-composing is like a group. So you can click all of these ones that you've animated, and I would leave the background out because that's sort of an independent object. And you can right-click, and you can do pre-compose. And so you can set this to combined animation. So in the same way that we have in the same way that we had this animation that is all the pieces individually, we've kind of created this group of objects. And so that correlates to this. So you can see when we pre-compose it without the background and we reopen this, it reappears, but there's no background behind it, but that's fine. And then also what we can do is we can drag this work area over to 4 seconds, and then we can right click on it and we can do trim comp to work area. So that'll just make things a little bit more clean and organized. Then we go over to animation. You can see that also trims to the 4 second mark. So right now we have an animation of it lifting up, but then for the point of this tutorial, we want things to also push down. So we can do that pretty easily by copying it and rotating it so that it's playing in reverse. So if I click on this and I do, before we did Control Shift D to duplicate and cut, but if we just do Control D, it creates a duplicate. And then now this becomes like a second piece that's behind it. So if we right click on that and we do time reverse layer, it creates this blue line underneath, and then that makes it set to be a reversal. And so as you can see, our composition is now too big because we have it set to 6 seconds. So we can go back to composition settings, and we can change this to 9 seconds. And so if we hold Alt and zoom out, we can start to see that this object is going, and I'm going to extend this background and bring this over so that we're creating a loop.
All right, so we're going to get into the details of making this have a little bit more flair, get into the accelerations. So to start by doing that, we're going to go back to this original animation, and we're going to use something called acceleration ramping to make this movement a little bit more dynamic instead of very linear. Because over time, it's just moving at a consistent rate, and that doesn't look as interesting as something that starts slow and gets quicker. So if we press the P shortcut to open up position, and then we click this button here, which is the graph editor, it opens up this setup here. So if yours doesn't look like this, you can click choose graph type in options and edit speed graph. Yours might start out by looking by editing values. That's not what you want. So you can edit speed graph. And so then it comes up with this. This is pretty much saying at the 1 second mark, it's moving at this velocity until it gets to this point. But we can make this an exponential velocity by clicking on these points and having these yellow tabs appear. And you can take this and have it start down here. So now what this is going to do, it's going to like start a little bit slower, and it's a little bit subtle right now, but if we can make it a little more dramatic. So we shift this over, so it's starting to look a little bit more like an exponential curve. Pull this line over. Now this kind of pops up and kind of converts to that. So then you press play on that, it starts slow and then picks up and continues. So we can do the same thing to this one, where what I did was I clicked on this and I clicked P to pop open this position. Then I click the speed graph again when I had that selected. If you don't have it selected, nothing will be here. But if you clicked on the position, it'll change it. So same thing for this one. I'm going to bring this tab down and have this one come over. And so if you get into doing these changes, I would recommend that you have them be consistent. So what I'm doing is I'm taking this yellow flag and I'm putting it to the second box into the 10, and I'm bringing this flag and I'm reducing it to 0. So like, I think it's really important just to mess around with it, because you can do one of these where it goes up and then gets slow again. And it really doesn't matter for something that's this small. But when you get into more complicated animations, like these exponential graphs really help. So if I turn that off, it also changes these keyframes to these little arrows. So you say that like so it knows that it's been edited.
So it like starts off slow and it goes, and kind of creates that stuff. And also, I think it's a little bit slow. So it's kind of pauses for a little bit too long here. So I'm just going to go in and kind of like clean it up a little bit, make things a little bit tighter so that there's not as much lag between the lifting and then the putting it down. So I'm probably going to reduce this to 3 seconds instead of 4. So it's just a little bit faster. And then another thing that we can do to kind of pick this up a little bit more, I need to trim comp to work area. So that goes and affects this. And so since these are duplicates, they both move away from each other, so you can drag them back together. And then I'm going to move this over so that when we loop it, it ends in that particular moment. So this is how it's looking now. Cool. What I would do, this is something that I do, is like when it comes back together, it doesn't need to be as fast. It doesn't need to be as slow. So you can increase the speed. So if we right click on this and we go to time stretch, we can change the stretch factor to -70. And so it's a negative because it's in reverse. And so 70 changes the duration from, originally it was 3 seconds, and this will bring it down to about 2 seconds. Press OK on that. And then we can drag this over again and adjust this. So now when it comes down, it'll come down just a little bit quicker. Then it lifts up and it'll be pretty nice. I love that. What I like to do is add a bit of texture to the background to give it a little bit more of a character rather than it just being one solid color. You can also go in and your background could be the site context, people walking around trees, and that can be an independent layer that you place behind. But for this, I'm going to go to the internet and I'm going to search for a grunge texture, which is kind of like dirty or grimy, just that it has some density and some darkness and lightness. I think for the other one, I use this one, but let's try this one. It's kind of like crackly, and I think it'll look really nice in the purple. So we can just right click and save image. We'll put it in this folder. And then once it's finished downloaded, you can just drag it in to your Illustrator file. Put it right in there. And then we can just drag this into our template. So we put it in here, it'll be on top of this layer. You got to put it below. And so in the same way that we expanded these arrows to get to position, we can also get to scale. So you can use this slider to change the scale here, or you can just stretch it out here. Right now it's going to be all wonky, but if you hold down Shift, it will preserve the aspect ratio, and then you can stretch it out. So yeah, so that looks, not bad, but what we can do is in the same way that Photoshop has different modes for the layers, this has modes here. So right now it's set to normal. We can go over and set this to screen, which will get rid of all of the white parts of the image and kind of give you this sort of like purplish hue. Soft light is pretty good too. If you want to get that sort of mood. So I would just mess around with these different textures, maybe color burn if you really want to get goth with it. But I'm going to try screen for now, and then I'm going to take this opacity and I'm going to lower it so that it's just more of like just a texture on it. Just kind of look what looks nice. Maybe overlay. Yeah, I think overlay is pretty cool. Press play on that. And I think that looks pretty good. We're going to get into the exporting process out of After Effects. So you want to go over to File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. Some people use the render queue, but I like the option to be able to export this out to a separate program, and that program handles exporting. When you're exporting, you have this is selected. See like this blue line that's around here. If you're just in here and you're clicking export, it's not going to work because it's not going to know if you want to export this composition or this composition. So make sure that you're in here and this is selected, and then you go over to Media Encoder. There's two kind of exports that you would want to, I think you should just know how to do. One would be an animated GIF, which is this one, which is auto playing and produces this material. And you can do that by clicking this button right here, and it'll open up this dynamic link connection, which is just a fancy way of saying settings. And then you want to change a couple of these details once this opens up. So mine's already set to animated GIF because I've already changed it. But if you click, you would click this format and do animated GIF. And then make sure you change your output name and where it's going to save, so you know where it's saving to. So I'm going to save it. It's going to save, typically it's going to save inside a folder that's linked to the After Effects file. Click save on that. And then I don't really change anything else. The width and the height is 1920 by 1080, still set. And then you press OK. All of these things are set, and you press this play button. And then this will run through and do the export. So there you have a looping GIF. And so you can take this GIF and you can import it into your PowerPoint or PDFs and have it autoplay when you present. But if you wanted, and you can also put this on your website and inside any other digital presentations. But say if you had a longer animation that you wanted to upload to YouTube, you would want to export this as an MP4 file. So to do that, I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to reset the status. So it starts back as the original video. So I'm going to click animated GIF, and I'm going to change this format to H.264. So that's HD. And this preset will say match source high bitrate. And then you can see now that this output name has changed from a GIF to an MP4. And so again, I'm not changing any of these other things. There isn't any audio, so I'm going to uncheck this. But maybe if you want to add whooshing sound effects, I don't know, up to you. And then we're going to press play. And so since this is a relatively small video, it'll take around the same time. But for longer and higher resolution videos, I've found that the exporting as a GIF takes longer. So we can open up that file. And there you go. And so you can upload this to your YouTube page or embed it on a website, and it's really great. I think if you're producing a file in Adobe Acrobat, there's a lot of really, you can have things autoplay in your files. Thank you for watching this video. I wanted to end by showing some work that one of my friends did in undergrad. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and you're able to use parts of it in your final reviews. Thank you.